Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Devine, and I'm here to talk to you about football, and not just football in the general sense, but I really wanted to talk tonight about a Christian response to the sport of football and what it means to engage in football viewership as a Christian, and what some of the big picture issues and ideas are to consider as a Christian when you're watching football and things that pertain to it. And so I want to start by just talking about the game tonight. If you're like me and are a football fan, there was a big time game tonight. The Dallas Cowboys took on the Philadelphia Eagles. First game of the season, opening night, big deal. 6 seconds into the game, Jalen Carter spits on Dak Prescott, gets ejected. We go from what's expected to be a blowout to suddenly Philadelphia is missing their best player. They've got to rally together, figure it out. For the first, 2 hours of the game, neither defense can get a stop, and then no points are scored for the last 25, 26 minutes of the game. Finishes 24-20, and really what was a remarkable back and forth, close game, fun to watch, but the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles prevail, right? And the reason why I wanted to bring up tonight's game specifically is because this is the time of year where football is going to start to take over the pop culture world, right? Just even in the build up to the past couple of weeks, you had Taylor Swift appearing on the Kelsey's New Heights podcast. Then Travis and Taylor got engaged. And then on top of that, further, we dove into opening night over the past couple of weeks. A lot of hype surrounding this game. Tomorrow night, there's another game in Brazil between the Kansas City Chiefs and San Diego Chargers. And there's all of this emotional energy invested in the sport of football, both culturally and nationally in the United States, but also now, as we see with the NFL headed to Brazil, it's becoming a worldwide phenomenon. And so you might say to yourself, well, why, as a Christian, do I have to engage with the sport of football in any meaningful way? I want to be in the world and not of it. If you're like me, you heard that phrase a whole bunch as a young person in your teens or your 20s. And I'm here to tell you that I actually think that's sort of the wrong approach to cultural things in general, but also just football in particular. To not engage with it is sort of to avoid engaging with culture at large, which, as theologians, as scholars, as pastors, as ministry leaders, is not what I would consider a best practice. I think being and maintaining a contextual relationship with our congregants and those people who are entrusted to our care is an incredibly important aspect of doing ministry in the real world today. So, uh, for me in particular, there's a few things I do want to touch on as we engage in this conversation. Big picture. The first is the obvious cultural impact that football has. Football is uh, incredibly popular in the United States in particular. It holds 19 of the 20 highest viewed programs of all times, all of which are Super Bowls, right? Over 100 million people watching many of those Super Bowls. And each of the past nine has set a new record on top of a previous one. It's a wild combination of events that occur, but Super Bowl Sunday is its own pop culture icon in the United States, right? On top of that, in 2024, 72 of the 100 most watched football programs for the entire year were NFL football games, right? So that's the week to week, including the regular season, the playoffs. 72 of the top 100 most viewed programs on television were NFL football games, and that was in an election year when debates actually sneak into some of those spaces. Uh, Likewise, in terms of football's reach, right? I mentioned it was a $23.1 billion industry. It's roughly 7 times larger annually than the NBA in terms of revenue generation. That's a huge number. It's 23 times larger than something like, say, the WWE is in the United States. And college football itself generates over $1 billion annually, up to $2 or $3 billion is what they're approaching now. So football is a big part of our cultural identity as Americans, and it is growing globally. And it is something that's not going to go away, but is only getting larger and more prevalent in society. Okay? So there are some biblical realities that we want to consider when we're discussing football, right? The first thing is just the general nature of whether or not football is a good thing, right? And this is a complicated conversation. And in the class that I've taken surrounding this topic in terms of sports and theology, one of the things that we've discussed about is the idea is football good because it's an instrument of God, that God is using football via the Holy Spirit to influence people towards the gospel? Or is football good because it's part of God's creation and God's creation is intrinsically good? And my instinct is to lean towards the instrumental side. And the reason why I say that football is a good thing because creation is good and we can create good stuff is because football's not all good, first of all. But second of all, there's this scene in the movie We Were Soldiers that frames this for me personally. And that scene is when Halmore is praying with his children just before he takes off for battle, right? He's praying, he's going to go head off to Vietnam, engage in warfare, and he's praying to God, and at the end of his prayer, he says, "As for our enemies, ignore their heathen prayers," right? And it's this moment of, like, oh, my enemies might be praying to God, and so if they are, choose me because I want God's favor. They don't deserve it, right? And that is the issue that I have with the instrumental approach. It's this idea that these certain people are elected. It doesn't work for me, right? It doesn't make sense conceptually to me that that's what God is using. I get that God can use anyone in any circumstance. You just look at, folks like Jacob in the Bible. I get that piece of it if you're wired that way. But that is why I tend towards more of an instrumental, away from an instrumental view and more towards an intrinsic value. With that, also, I do think that in terms of like what we consume as watchers of products on TV, music, sports, what we consume on the internet, there is this question around violence in football that I think holds a lot of merit, right? And I know a lot of you as Christian parents are struggling with whether or not to put your kids in Pee Wee football and things of that nature. And what I would say to that specific issue is football is evolving as we are learning. And I do want to give credit to the sport in terms of just the way that they've changed their approach to a violent game to try to make it less violent. Now, if you watch the game tonight, like I did, there's a couple of times where people got clocked, but it was a product of circumstance as opposed to malicious intent, right? The NFL used to publish a video called NFL Crunch Course, and it was NFL's hardest hitters and hardest hits, right? And I found the VHS tape, and then you can watch the VHS version. It's on YouTube if you want to check it out. But it's just the glorification of violence piece of the NFL that used to be just a big part of the advertising. I remember specifically a Steve Atwater hit over the middle that was always played on every highlight reel, and the NFL has stopped showing those, right? And a big product of that has to do with CTE and CTE research. If you don't know much about that, I highly recommend you check out the movie Concussion. Just watch that for the first time in leading up to having this conversation. But the NFL has changed its approach to football. They've helped influence youth sports, so kids take fewer hits. They've also helped influence college sports, where ejections for helmet-to-helmet contact happen immediately, and the penalties are harsh because they're trying to change long-term behavior for the benefit of everybody involved with the sport. And the truth is, yes, they had to do that because there's a money issue involved with that, but also it was flatly the right thing to do, right? Watching people go and just try to knock each other out over the middle is not really the type of thing I want to consume as a Christian. And so knowing that the goal is to get rid of as much of that as possible, is actually really helpful in terms of me processing my own viewership. Likewise, one of the things that the NFL is doing this season is they're helping. They put a point of emphasis is the term they use. Point of emphasis against taunting. And for me, as a parent, that is the thing when I watch sports that drives me nuts. Is why does everybody have to talk after they do something fun or excellent or great? Why is there always a celebration to show up the opponent? And so to take taunting essentially out of the game is actually it was very appealing to me that that happened as well. Um, I do want to delve into some contextual realities for those of you that are maybe pastors or youth ministers or work in ministry. There are some coastal realities to this conversation as well, in terms of how much you may or may not need to recognize that football is significant in the lives of many people around you. I used to live on the East Coast and I'm back on the West Coast. And one of the things I learned in moving from the West Coast to the East Coast the first time was that the time zone difference and the way viewership is changes people's consumption of things. And so, whereas on the West Coast, it was very difficult to have a meeting right after church because people were rushing home to watch a football game. On the East Coast, actually, it was sort of a built-in part of the Sunday. You could have a post-church meeting or go to lunch post-church, and then you would head home and watch the game. And so for folks on the East Coast, you probably actually have to adjust less in your consideration for football with some of the recommendations I'm going to make later, compared to folks on the West Coast, where I actively view people on their phones. I sometimes operate our soundboard at church, which sits in the balcony, and I can see people on their phones checking game scores and things like that. They check text messages other weeks, but once football starts, the numbers definitely go up. That's some anecdotal notes there for you. Uh, so I wanted to throw out just some ways that these contextual things will have some influence on you. For example, I've been in a congregation where our annual meeting used to be on the day of the AFC and NFC championship game. It was cycled this way for years, and it was written that way in the bylaws. Well, the NFL creates a bye week, right? And so what happened one year in particular is we had our annual meeting scheduled on that day, and the Seattle Seahawks played the San Francisco 49ers, and I worked at a church in the Bay Area. And so as soon as church was done, everybody bailed. Nobody came to the meeting. We had like 14 people there, didn't really even have a quorum. And we realized we got to change the date of this. And I know for some people, the way they view that is people are elevating this thing over worship, or they're elevating it over church, or elevating it over God. Um, and I don't think that's people's intention, and I don't really think that's like a way to bring people towards the gospel, is to shame them into a particular behavior, right? It tells you that they are valuing going to watch the game more, certainly, and I agree with that. But it does not tell you that watching the game is bad, or that their desire to choose the game over a particular church meeting or church worship service in some cases uh, makes them not followers of Jesus, or not actively following Jesus, right? Uh, and I say that knowing, like, yes, worship is very important, something many of us do on a weekly basis, but there's no mandate that we worship in the congregational setting every week. And I say that carefully because sometimes we treat it like there is. I usually end up at multiple services every Sunday, like I'm sure many of you do. But there is this dialogue that if you're not doing worship, you're failing God in some way. And I think that's the step that's too far. I think that we need to avoid the shame portion of the conversation more than anything else. I do think that sports are inherently um, something that teaches good values overall. They teach teamwork and sportsmanship. They teach dealing with adversity. They teach physical fitness, and they have some basic things that participating in sports that are good. It's good for children to do them, it's good for teens to do them, and it's good for adults to engage in sports and to engage in the playing of sports. Now, football, I think, goes beyond play because it does tend to be a little more violent, but it is incredibly engaging because the pace of play is very interesting. Um, every possession matters more in football compared to basketball, which is up and down, up and down, up and down, right? And so there's this natural um, interest that we hold because of the way that football is played, and so we are fascinated by it. We do love football culturally, and rather than fight that, I want to encourage us as Christians to embrace that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be maybe like quite so in your face. Like maybe some people would be critical of the sometimes odd marriage between, you know, Texas churches and the Friday Night Lights component there, or the way that some people associate football with religion, sports, and Christian nationalism. Right? That is not what I'm advocating for in any way, shape, or form. But rather this understanding that culture is fascinated and engaged by it, and rather than trying to say that this is an inherently bad thing because people are engaged with it, why not engage in it with them? That is the crux of what I would suggest to you. So before I sign off, I want to go through kind of 5 ways that can really process how ministries I've been involved with have chosen to engage with football a little differently, and then talk about some of the things to carry on maybe going forward. So the first thing that we've done most recently is we've changed our rally day in the fall to kickoff Sunday. It's the day that the NFL season starts every year. That's just the first Sunday, I should say, right? The season started today. But this coming Sunday, we title Kickoff Sunday now instead of Rally Day. We have people wear jerseys. We've made an event of it. It's designed to be festive and engage our people in what is happening in culture simultaneously. It's just a way, like whether it's Rally Day or Kickoff Sunday, it doesn't really matter, but it's sort of to acknowledge the festivities of Kickoff Sunday, and actually a way for people to get excited about it because they're associating it with something else they like as well. That's a simple thing that we do. Another thing is to acknowledge local rivalry games when they happen, whether that be in announcements or um, uh, sermon illustrations or things like that. Usually, when a local rivalry game happens around here, in our case, the what used to be known as the Civil War, the Oregon State Oregon games, it's a big deal. It's a big deal to people when they are entering into church. It's a big deal when people are exiting. There's no reason we can't acknowledge that thing exists outside the vacuum of the sport itself. It's also a way for people to sort of feel more at ease and comfortable in a room setting. I've been known to both promote and demote my Ducks when they succeed, um, but have a good time with the Oregon State fans in that regard. So acknowledging local rivalry games. A third thing would be to conduct a Bible study on Thursday nights, where you host people to watch the Thursday night football game, do Bible study at halftime. There's these great things we have called DVRs now where you can pause the game. So you can take 45 minutes on it, fast forward through some commercials, get caught up and watch the game and finish it. And it's not a huge deal. Some people will come for the football primarily. Some people will come for the Bible study primarily. But it's a way to merge the two things and get people together in a way that excites them. And you can introduce some biblical content into that dialogue there. The fourth is an event known as the Super Bowl of Caring. This is done every Super Bowl Sunday at various churches throughout the country, where kids will hold pots and pans, and you collect money for local food pantries and national ones as part of the Super Bowl of Caring offering. It's a really cool program. It's a way to acknowledge that the Super Bowl is happening. The Super Bowl of Caring is spelled Souper. You can't infringe on the NFL's copyright. We all know that. But more importantly, it's a it's a day of massive consumption in our culture, and the Super Bowl of Caring has taken that day of mass consumption and said, hey, there's a lot of people in our country who are struggling for food. Let's support them on a day where more tortilla chips are going to get eaten than any other day of the year. And so that's a cool thing you can do and engage that way. And the other is, plan your events accordingly. I mentioned the NFC Championship game story with everybody running off to go watch the Niners game, but that's a reality, right? You probably don't want to plan a men's retreat that runs into the weekend of the Super Bowl. You probably want to do it in that dead week in space. Just use logic to know when you're creating something that's in competition for your people. I'm not saying run your whole church calendar around football. That's ridiculous, right? But there are some major football events that you might want to be aware of, and not, compete with something that holds such a value from a cultural standpoint in your congregation. And the last thing I want to say is take a measured and nuanced approach to football as a Christian, right? We can all acknowledge that sports have bad moments. The NBA has the malice at the palace. Major League Baseball has brawls. Automobile racing has accidents. Football has violent hits, right? There are many, many times where watching a football game can be very sad. What we had with Damar Hamlin a couple of years ago was really, really terrible. And there are moments that kind of we collectively hold our breath. But by and large, football is about engaging in a fun, athletic competition meant for the enjoyment and entertainment of those watching it and playing it. And so I really want to focus on the intent that football is trying to provide over, nitpicking the outcomes. But I do think as a Christian, embracing the country's love for football will do more to serve the purpose of Christ than not engaging it, right? Jesus did not try to change the culture that he was in terms of what they were engaged in per se, right? He used the example of a mustard seed in an agrarian society because that's what was there. I think it's okay to use football in a sermon illustration. I think it's okay to mention a specific event or game in a sermon, good or bad, and engage in the pop culture that is football as opposed to avoiding it. And so that's really just what I want to recommend to the preachers and teachers out there. And I hope you find this conversation useful and meaningful to you. Spent a lot of time looking up details on the NFL and trying to understand why it is that we just are so enthralled with football and the NFL in particular. And the answer is, I think, because it is good, it is fun, and we inherently kind of recognize that and find joy in it. It is not, explicitly always doing God's work, and we need to hold that tension within us. But I think it does a lot more positive than it does negative. And as Christians, we should do our best to embrace that and then engage that and be contextual in our culture. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.